Us to focus on some fears that IEBC has expressed in preparation for next year's election, and they are contained in the strategic framework for the IEBC between the years 2021 years until 2024, and they are saying that they are fearing of delayed electoral laws amendments, last-minute amendments to laws and judicial rulings that affect timelines that they have already come up with. Political risks, they say, are election-related violence, the refusal to accept results by candidates, IEBC staff profiling, especially during election season. Another fear that IEBC has is commission vacancies, the recruitment, they're saying close to election, hampers their preparations. We know that at the moment the selection panel is set to begin the interviews on 7th of July. There's actually supposed to be a psychometric test on the 30th of this month, that is on Wednesday. Then the technological risks that IEBC says looking at are obsolete BVR kits. Remember the biometric voter registration kits that were used for the election of 2013. Now they are saying they are obsolete, and they need to work on the KIMS kits to make sure that they can also be used for registration. Malfunctioning ICT systems and equipment, over-reliance on vendors, over legislation on use of ICT, and cybersecurity threats at a time that much of the election transmission, election results transmission for presidential election are majorly on ICT platforms. They are saying that what they must do before the election is to modify KIMS kits for registration of voters, to upgrade ICT systems, timely funding for ICT deployment, enhance ICT security system, Treasury to allow IEBC to do direct procurement of ICT equipment, which I think has already been allowed by the National Treasury. Then enhance security for staff. They are calling on security organs. Then also insecurity at electoral services has to be dealt with, and enforce electoral code of conduct, especially on politicians when it comes to matters violence. And Honorable Ishongwa, as we look at this, of course, tying the question about whether it may be necessary to delay the election, and then looking at the challenges that IEBC is highlighting, just about 13 or so months to the election, what do you think is the role of Parliament at this time, and also of political leaders, to ensure that the next election is credible, verifiable, and people can have trust in the Commission?
First, Gituku, I was just trying to get the article of the Constitution that talks about any change or any reason why you would extend the term of Parliament, or you probably in that way be able to extend the date of elections. And I think it's only in a state of war, not emergencies. And therefore, I don't know whether COVID, as my brother here was asking, whether COVID is indeed a war. And whether somebody would be inclined to instigate some war with some country somewhere to be able to extend that term. But I don't take it lightly that there are characters speaking about it, and even entertaining that thought that you could change the date of elections. I think we need to build a country where we stick to the Constitution as it is. The date, as Ledama here has said, is fixed, and I think Beatrice also agreed with that. It's fixed in the Constitution, and we must stick to that. It is up to us to work around those dates and get to know what needs to be done before those dates. And therefore, if you ask me, what should be concerning us today is not BBI. It is those issues that IEBC is pointing out. How fast can we be able to change the KIMS kits, for example? You remember the last elections, the issues that came up with our colleagues in the minority were issues to do with transmission of results and the veracity of the results that were able to be transmitted through the KIMS kits to the National Tallying Center. Therefore, what should be of priority, because IEBC is telling you that there are concerns that people may not be able to accept results. There are concerns on the kind of technology you're using, whether it's obsolete or not. And of course, the issues that were raised by the Maraga Supreme Court decision of 2017. If indeed we want to deal with the cycle of electoral violence, this electoral violence comes around because people are not able to accept results. Then we should be focusing on what electoral reforms do we need to institute between now and next year, before the even IEBC gets to the real preparations for the next general election. Therefore, for me, I think that is where our focus should be, and even as Parliament, we shouldn't be wasting our time thinking about BBI. Constitutions and change of the constitutions can wait. there's nothing urgent about changing this constitution other than pursuit of very selfish agendas by the political class. And you know, this change of the constitution agenda was not a Kenyan's agenda. It was an agenda of the political class, disguised as a people's agenda. And I think the High Court had its say on that, which I largely agree with, that this was a political process led by the political class in the interest and only for the benefit of the political class. We should have our time as Kenyans. And I think the High Court also went into an elaborate detail of how we ought to change this constitution if it was to be people-driven. Therefore, I would really urge that we all as leaders, all as a country, be able to focus on the minimal electoral reforms that we need to ensure that we have a free and fair election. If we have a free and fair election, we have no need to fear getting into an election.
Another moment in Parliament, do you think that...
Sorry?
At the moment in Parliament, do you think that this is already being worked on, the amendments that are necessary to make sure that the work of IEBC becomes bearable or more efficient?
Minimally. Because if you look at what is there in Parliament, it's probably just private members' bills that have been proposed by private members. If I have seen nothing from the Attorney General, because we have overburdened the Attorney General to go fight out in court on behalf of the political class again, because he has no time to look at really the things that matter. He's more interested in looking at and in pursuit of those things that will protect his job. Just like my sister Beatrice was going on the offensive earlier here in protection to protect her job.
Really?
I didn't know.
That is a problem.
It is good when somebody just calls you in the morning and finds anger that Lachi did.
Yes, I want to raise this question with you because you've seen what concerns are for IEBC. And if you are to reflect on what happened in 2017 and specifically the presidential vote and why the election was even nullified, have we done anything to resolve those issues, including the aspect of about 11,000 polling stations did not have the 3G connectivity that would have enabled them, the presiding officers, to transmit the results forms to the National Tallying Center?
Well, first of all, let us go back now after 2013 when we did the elections. Before we came into 2017 is when we had the committee that was at Windsor, and we tried looking at IEBC. You know, the very unfortunate part of all of us politicians is that we forget this is an institution that guides us when we need to get to an election that can be an election that can be free and fair to everyone, to every person who is vying. And therefore, when we always come, it becomes the last thing. We always now remember that there's an institution called Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission, when we are just one year, every time, 1 year to an election. We forget that this is the same institution we are going to bash, that even now, even when people are doing their interviews, everyone always fear, how am I going to work for IEBC, knowing very well my career can come to an end? That young people will fear that if I start with IEBC, I'm wondering whether I'll ever get an employment again. Because after that election, whoever hasn't won, you are so angry, you anger the country, you politicize the country, and we are just about to go into conflicts ourselves. Now here we are, IEBC is telling us there are very key things. Now when they talk of obsolete BVR kits, then it triggers. It triggers that we have to be very careful, because you remember how tense we are normally in the counties when now all these things are happening. So if you're telling us we have obsolete BVR kits, then a malfunctioning ICT system, it means, and the question then goes also, because you see, IEBC also should bring out these things earlier. You'd rather even say Parliament received a document from IEBC and they refused to put funds for it, or they put funds and government treasury refused to fund. You'd rather say, but now when you're coming also as IEBC and you're saying we have all this, but you have never come out, you have a committee in Parliament that also you are able to come in and tell your committee, this is something that we need. But you're coming also the last minute.
They actually say they have been at it, sometimes made requests even to maintain the KIMS kits, but never gotten the budget from the National Treasury.
That is what I'm saying. What they need to now be telling Kenyans is that we have tried as IEBC to do all these things to Treasury, and Treasury has been an issue to give us. And anyway, as we continue with the by-elections that we've been having, definitely within those by-elections, you can be telling yourself that we need this. I am happy to hear Treasury has given them direct procurement. But you see, the other thing now IEBC should be doing, and I know they've been having challenges also because of the having a lean commission, but then also you have a staff that I remember within the Act, they have some sort of powers to ensure they can continue even when the commissioners are lean. But the staff has to continue working. The second thing is we have never had goodwill. Even ourselves, we don't give goodwill to the commission itself. You know, if you give them goodwill, it becomes a political issue. So we have to agree as politicians also. It is time, not every time, to politicize IEBC and to always feel, and that is what all politicians, even me, when you have decided these are the returning officers, if I was not part of that time knowing who is that returning officer, I have a lot of fear in even trusting this returning officer. And I remember at one point we were saying that it is always important that IEBC can decide. You have returning officers who manned a county in the last elections. This time, they can move to another county beyond and bring the one who was the other side to come and work on this side. The other thing I know we've always had a challenge is the presiding officers. And that is where, because they are the ones who man from the polling station.
Right.
Then you come to the clerks. Now the clerks, the politicians cannot tell me they are never part of it. You see, so it becomes a very political commission, even if you'd want to make it stand and say, because a clerk will be saying, it is me who decided, when they asked for the people to go for interviews, I gave like 20 or 100. I mean, it happens. That's what happens. That's how they are recruited.
Quite unfortunate for that to happen, that you can be in a position to influence who becomes the referee of the game. But two issues, Senator.
It happens. I mean,
Senator Lekina. Remember that case that Justice Odunga said that the appointment of the 290 constituency returning officers was done illegally. Of course, there was a stay from the Court of Appeal, and that allowed the repeat presidential election to go on. So that's one thing that has to happen before the election. Then Marjan Hussein, who is the acting CEO of the IEBC, told the Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs of the Senate that they had requested for 14.5 billion shillings, but they were they had requested for 40 billion shillings, but they were allocated 40.5 billion shillings for the current financial year. So how does IEBC surmount all these challenges that it needs resources? There is work that it has to do to correct the mistakes of 2017, but also go ahead to bring that credibility of a commission whose 4 commissioners are not yet in office?
So, before I respond to that query, earlier on you raised 2 very pertinent issues. One dealing with election reforms, dealing with amendments to Elections Act. And I think the question that comes to mind is that do we really need to amend these elections laws? And I think based on court decisions, it really shows that when these elections laws were being enacted, they were not being done so for the interest of the country, but for the interest of a particular class of people. You know, we now have 2 very important issues. One of them no one is talking about. And this one is actually going to bite really hard. One is the issue of the Elections Financing Bill, or Act, which, if you read the Act as it is, you know, a lot of it were postponed from 2017 to now 2022. And you'll hear people jumping around saying, you know, let's amend the Elections Financing Bill, Act, because the way it is right now, if you read it, as someone who is seeking to run for office, you'll be afraid, because you'll be required to submit your financials to the Auditor General. You know, I mean, you think about the 290 constituencies. Think about the 2,000 or 1,400, you know, wards. When, you know, then you're just going to create a huge Auditor General office. Is it going to be possible for them to be able to carry out? So I think it is important that any time we sit down and draft any piece of legislation, we do so for posterity, but we don't do it for our own personal gains. Number two, the elections laws, the Elections Act as it is right now, it is a big challenge. And I don't see how IEBC will decide to ignore the law. They will continue implementing as it is. There are things which were suspended, you know, from being implemented in 2017 based on a negotiation until 2022. Do we really practically have the time in Parliament to do so? Now, in defense of IEBC, I know IEBC have been in touch with both you know, Justice and Legal Affairs committees of the Senate and also of the National Assembly to try and bring these issues to the table. But as my colleague was talking about here, there are two ways. One, there are bills which are brought by the government, sponsored by the government, and the other one are private members' bills. If you go to the floor of the House now, you'll find that private members' bills are more than bills which are brought in by the government. Sometimes when IEBC comes in with proposals, it depends on the interest, who is actually pushing it. Now, coming to your question is in terms of whether, I don't know, maybe you can repeat your question.
Yes, I asked about the request for 40 billion shillings in budget.
Okay, I'll get back to you. See, we have a serious problem in the country, and we must admit that we do. You know, counties are facing the same problem. We have a problem because of COVID and also because of the debt that we have. We're talking about under collection of revenue. If you talk to the controller of budget or even the Commission of Revenue Allocation, they give you the statistics of how much money is being collected in the country by the county government in terms of on-source revenue, by even the national government in taxes, then you will find that Treasury will not be able to honor the request given by IEBC. Yes, IEBC require 40 billion to be able to carry out their work. So then it is us now in Parliament to come back and sit down and say, what do we do? Since we cannot be able to carry out one election, instead of talking about amending the entire constitution, is it possible for us to amend certain Elections Act? I don't know whether we require, whether those things are under Article 255 of the Constitution, or can we now say that in terms of elections of ward representative, it can be carried out at a particular time, and then we can be able to meet these budgets? When I hear that the ICT system is now obsolete, I agree. You know, most computers only last for 3 years. I mean, this is business. I mean, every election is 5 years. So we need to be a little bit pragmatic. We also need to be able to understand that when IEBC come out, Chebukati says, I'm not able to do this. Instead of us throwing all the daggers at him and saying, you must be able to do it, or instead of us, you know, portraying our interest and saying, you know, let's remove Chebukati, let's put in someone else, we must, first of all, ask basic questions. Are we prepared a good environment for them to be able to actually deliver the services that they are required? And finally, I think we have to deal with this issue of mistrust. You know, no one trusts the IEBC. You know, in fact, in the next coming election, every politician, particularly those ones seeking the higher office, would be trying to ensure that it is their person, a person who will take care of their interests. It is not about merit. It has got nothing to do with meritocracy.
That is at what level? Returning officer or commissioner?
Everything. Returning officer. You know, you start from the top. You ensure that if there's a way, but there's none. If there's a way, they could remove the three commissioners.
I'm sure that your mic has a challenge. We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll conclude on that point. You can text in your views or Twitters at Citizen TV Kenya at Sam Gituku. The hashtag to use is Daybreak. We're back in a moment to continue this discussion and more.